He went there for a charity photo, but found the child he'd been searching for a decade. Welcome to our storytelling channel, where every tale touches the heart. If you enjoyed today's story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers all around the world. Your voice matters here. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because tomorrow's story is something truly unforgettable. One click, and you won't miss a single moment of the journey. Ethan Collins was a name many in the tech world knew well. At just 47 years old, he had built an empire from scratch, founding a software startup that eventually became one of Silicon Valley's most celebrated success stories. He had everything people often dream of: luxury cars, a sprawling 10,000 square foot home in the California hills, and a bank account that seemed to grow faster than he could spend it. But behind the glossy headlines and award ceremonies, Ethan carried a pain no amount of wealth could erase. 10 years earlier, his life had taken a tragic turn. At the time, his daughter Lily was just 6 years old, a bright, giggly child who loved the smell of lemon trees in their backyard and carried her gray stuffed bunny everywhere she went. One sunny afternoon, Ethan and his wife had left Lily in the care of their trusted nanny, while they attended a charity gala downtown. It was supposed to be a simple day, a walk in the park, some ice cream, a bedtime story later that night. But the call came before sunset. The nanny had been found in a wooded area near the park, lifeless. The police arrived quickly. Search teams flooded the neighborhood. Drones, dogs, volunteers, even helicopters scoured every inch. But Lily had vanished. No witnesses, no clues. Just that stuffed bunny, left behind near a bench under a maple tree. From that moment on, Ethan's world collapsed. His marriage strained and eventually fell apart under the weight of shared grief and blame. His once warm home grew cold and silent. He poured himself into his company, working day and night, not out of ambition, but because the silence at home was unbearable. Yet even at the peak of his success, the corner of his heart that belonged to Lily remained untouched by time. Every birthday passed with a quiet visit to that same park bench. Every Christmas, a small gift box with Lily's name on it sat unopened beneath a tree. And though the police had closed the case years ago, Ethan never truly gave up. From time to time, he would hire private investigators. Most came back with nothing. A few came back with false hope, but still he kept searching, desperate for even a whisper of truth. He never stopped being her father. Not for a day. The world knew him as a brilliant mind, a business icon, a man who could predict trends and disrupt markets. But Ethan knew himself as something else entirely. A father haunted by loss, holding onto a fragile thread of hope in a world that had long stopped believing. And while everyone else had moved on, Ethan stayed frozen in that single cruel moment when everything was taken from him. He never imagined that a routine visit, 10 years later, to a modest orphanage on the edge of Denver would become the moment that would change everything. 10 years had passed since the day Ethan Collins lost his daughter. Though the world had moved on, Ethan had never truly returned to it. He was successful, yes, but not whole. His days were structured, efficient, productive. His nights, silent. So when his PR team suggested he visit a local orphanage in Denver to boost the company's public image, he barely reacted. These things were routine now. Smile for the camera, cut a check, post a polished statement about giving back. It was nothing personal, just business. That October morning, the air was crisp and the leaves burned bright in gold and red along the highway. Ethan arrived at the orphanage just before noon in his usual style: black Escalade, tailored overcoat, and a face trained to look interested. He expected a quick walkthrough, a few photos with the staff, and a speech about future donations, in and out in under an hour. But fate had other plans. As he stepped into the main hall, the sounds of a children's choir filled the air. Dozens of kids stood on a small wooden stage, singing a sweet off-key version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Ethan remained near the back, distant but polite, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. And then he saw her, a girl, maybe 16 years, old, stood near the center of the group. Her voice was quiet, but her eyes pulled him in like a memory he'd locked away but never truly lost. They were wide, expressive, almost too knowing for someone her age. She had long, dark hair tied back in a simple braid, and her features, her features were unmistakable. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. His heart stuttered. For a moment, the room spun. She looked like Lily, not just similar, hauntingly familiar. The curve of her cheek, the tilt of her head, even the way she held her hands close to her chest as she sang. He nearly walked out. His breath was shallow, his mind racing. It can't be, he told himself. It's been too long, don't do this again. But he couldn't walk away, not this time. After the performance ended, Ethan asked to speak with the director. He tried to keep his voice steady, professional, but his hands trembled. He pointed to the girl. "Who is she?" he asked. The director looked surprised. "That's Emily. We found her near the interstate 10 years ago. No ID, no family. She only remembered her first name, Lily or something. Like that, she was terrified. Barely spoke for months. Ethan couldn't breathe. The age matched. The timeline fit. And the name? The name was the final blow. He clenched his jaw to keep from breaking in front of strangers. But inside, everything cracked. The man who had come here for a photo op now stood on the edge of a truth he hadn't dared to dream of in a decade. He looked back toward the girl, and for the first time in 10 years, hope returned. Ethan Collins had faced high-stakes boardroom deals, media storms, and billion-dollar decisions. But nothing, not even the most ruthless corporate showdown, compared to what he felt now. Standing in the hallway of that Denver orphanage, his heart thundered in his chest like it hadn't in years. His breath was uneven. His mind flipped between fear and hope at dizzying speed. Emily. That's what they called her. But to Ethan, every second that passed made it harder to ignore what his instincts screamed. This wasn't just any girl. This could be his girl. His Lily. He followed the director into a small, cluttered office lined with stacks of files and faded posters about child safety. The woman pulled out a worn manila folder labeled Emily Intake File. She slid it across the desk, her voice gentle but curious. "Is something wrong, Mr. Collins?" He didn't answer right away. He was staring at the file as if it might explode. Inside were photocopies of police reports, social worker notes, and an intake form filled with crude handwriting. Found near I-70. No ID. 6 years old. Stated her name was Lily or Lily. Signs of trauma. Memory loss, likely due to shock. Ethan's fingers tightened around the folder. How long has she been here? He asked, his voice low and strained. 10 years, no one ever came for her. She never talked much about her past. Sometimes she'd say things like lemon trees or a gray bunny, but nothing we could trace. Most families who came to adopt thought she was too withdrawn. She's sweet, but the director hesitated. She keeps her distance. Ethan almost laughed, but it came out like a cough. Lemon trees, a gray bunny. That was their backyard. That was her toy, the one he'd kept in a box in his closet, untouched since the day she vanished. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I want a DNA test," he said firmly. "Today, I'll cover all the costs. I'll bring in my own lab if I have to." The director blinked, surprised. "Mr. Collins, are you saying you think she might be your daughter?" "I don't think," he said, voice trembling. No." Outside the office, he caught a glimpse of Emily sitting in the common area, a book in her lap, her gaze far away. He wanted to run to her, to say her name. But what if he was wrong? What if this was another cruel twist? He'd had false leads before, but none like this. None that looked at him with her eyes. He stepped into the hallway and called his assistant. "Find the best DNA lab in the state. Have them here within 2 hours. Then almost in a whisper he added, "Tell them it's urgent. I think I found my daughter." And as he hung up, a tear slipped down his cheek, because for the first time in 10 years, he had something real to hold on to. The next 3 days were a blur of emotion, paperwork, and unbearable waiting. Ethan Collins had expedited everything. He flew in a private geneticist, cleared legal hurdles, and had the DNA swabs taken before the sunset that same day. The lab promised results within 2 hours, fast, but for Ethan it felt like a lifetime. He barely slept. He couldn't focus. For a man who once thrived on control, this was agony. He had no power over the outcome, only hope. Fragile, dangerous hope. Each day he returned to the orphanage under the guise of follow-up paperwork. But really he just needed to see her. Emily. Or Lily. She was always sitting in the same corner of the library. Quiet, distant, eyes trained on some novel, though Ethan doubted she was really reading. Every now and then, she'd glance up and catch him watching. Her expression was unreadable. Not afraid, not curious, just guarded. Like she didn't trust herself to feel anything too soon. Then the call came. It was early morning. Ethan sat in his Denver hotel suite, staring at the unopened box that held Lily's stuffed gray bunny. Still worn, still soft, still whole after all these years. His phone rang. He recognized the number immediately, the lab. He answered with a tight breath. Collins. A pause. Mr. Collins, the woman on the other end said gently, I have the results of the DNA comparison between you and the child listed as Emily. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. And, the voice steadied, she's your biological daughter. The match is definitive. Ethan's vision blurred. He pressed his hand to his mouth as a choked breath escaped him. He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. 10 years of longing, of regret, of doubt, all broke loose in that one moment. Lily was alive. Alive. He didn't waste a second. By late afternoon, he was back at the orphanage, gray bunny in hand, heart racing faster than any boardroom pitch he'd ever made. The director met him at the door, already knowing. She's the courtyard, she said softly. I think she's been waiting for you. Ethan walked outside. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and rose. There, sitting on a stone bench, was the girl who had haunted his dreams for a decade. He approached slowly. She looked up as he neared. Their eyes locked. He knelt before her, holding out the bunny. Do you remember this? He whispered. She stared at it, lips parted. Her eyes shimmered. And then, in the softest voice, she spoke. That's my bunny. A pause. Daddy? Ethan broke. He reached for her, and she fell into his arms without hesitation. His tears soaked her hair. He held her like he'd never let go again, and in that moment the world, his world, finally felt right. After 10 years of darkness, Ethan had found his light. Not in wealth, not in fame, but in the quiet heartbeat of the daughter he'd never stopped loving. Ethan Collins had built a life on logic, efficiency, and strategic thinking. But nothing could have prepared him for what came after that moment on the bench. Holding Lily again for the first time in 10 years shattered every carefully constructed wall he had put up around his heart. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was sacred. It was the kind of silence that held more meaning than words ever could. She didn't pull away. He didn't rush. For the first time in a decade, time didn't feel like the enemy. But healing wasn't instant. Back inside, the staff gave them space. Ethan stayed late into the evening, sitting beside Lily in a quiet room, learning her again. She didn't remember everything. Trauma had stolen much of her early childhood, but bits and pieces slipped through. Lemon trees, a birthday cake with purple frosting, her mother's laughter. A song he used to hum when tucking her in. He didn't push. He just listened. And when she asked, "Do I have a room in your house?" he smiled with tears in his eyes and said, "You never stopped having one." Over the next few days, legal procedures moved quickly. Ethan hired the best attorneys in the state to make sure everything was handled properly. The system, for once, moved with compassion. The court granted him full custody. And just like that, Lily Collins, no longer Emily, was coming home. News didn't take long to reach the media. Tech mogul reunites with long-lost daughter after 10 years. Headlines flashed across screens. Cameras waited at his gate. But Ethan didn't care about the spotlight. He shut it all out. This wasn't a story for the world. It was his story. Her story. Back at his California home, Lily stepped through the front door slowly, unsure, eyes wide. The house was massive, echoing with quiet and history, but Ethan had prepared her old room just the way it had been. Same colors, same curtains, and yes, the lemon tree still bloomed outside the window. That night, as he stood in the doorway of her room, watching her brush her hair, something broke in him again, not from pain, but from gratitude. She turned to him and whispered, "Do you still hum that song?" He nodded, and in the quiet, as the stars blinked outside, Ethan began to hum. The same melody, the same rhythm. This time, though, his voice trembled with joy. He had spent 10 years drowning in grief, building an empire that couldn't fill the hole in his chest. But none of that mattered anymore, because in the end what brought Lily back wasn't money, power, or planning. It was a single, random act of kindness, a visit he didn't want to make, to a place he almost walked out of. And now, that one moment had given him everything he thought he'd lost. He was no longer just a millionaire. He was a father again. And this time, he wasn't letting go. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of love, loss, and reunion. Stories like Ethan and Lily's remind us that sometimes, even after the darkest storms, light can still find its way back in. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the story moved you the most? Have you or someone you know ever experienced a moment that changed everything, just like Ethan's visit to the orphanage? Please take a moment to share your feelings in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. We're always amazed by how far these stories travel. Your insights and reflections help us grow this community of listeners who believe in second chances and the power of hope. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. There's another emotional story coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss. Turn on notifications so you're the first to know when it drops. Together, let's keep spreading stories that matter. Stories that remind us all of what it means to love, to lose, and to hold on just a little longer. Your voice matters here. Let's talk in the comments below.